Hi, welcome to the Awkward Angler podcast, an authentic series talking about fishing, social justice, and storytelling with folks within the outdoor industry. I'm your host, Erica Nelson. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a self-taught angler that is passionate about sharing my learning journey. I am also a Brown Folks Fishing Ambassador and organizational leadership developer with incredible amounts of optimism. Understanding that we all have something to learn from each other, this podcast is for the aspiring, the beginner, the mediocre, and the expert angler willing to learn new skills and how to be a better ally. Working through hard conversations can definitely get a little awkward. We fumble through them and worry about getting it right. It's time to step out of your comfort zone and start getting awkward. This show is for mature audiences. Be sure to follow for updates on awkwardangler.com and on Instagram at awkwardangler. Hi, welcome to the Awkward Angler podcast, an authentic series talking about fishing, social justice, and storytelling with folks within the outdoor industry. I'm your host, Erica Nelson. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a self-taught fly angler that is passionate about sharing my learning journey. Understanding that we all have something to learn from each other, this podcast is for the aspiring, the beginner, the mediocre, and the expert angler willing to learn new skills and how to be a better ally. This show is for mature audiences. Be sure to follow for updates on awkwardangler.com and on Instagram at awkwardangler.
My name is Marco Kamimura. He, him, his are my pronouns, and I'm currently in Iowa, Grinnell, Iowa, on the ancestral lands of the Meskwaki and Fox ancestral territories. And I guess I can share a bit of how I got into fishing. And what I'm doing now. I guess actually I'll start here. I'm currently a college student at Grinnell College, which is what brought me here. I grew up in Michigan for this latter part of my pre-college life, and then my beginnings were really in LA, where my pretty much all of my family is centralized. I was born in Boston. My mom was getting her master's out there when I was born, but we didn't live there for very long. But fishing has been in my family fishing and hunting has been in my family for a very long time, as with most people, although it turned into a sporting activity with my great-grandfather when he had to learn to make money in other ways when, for a number of different reasons. But I mean, a big part of my story and why I'm here today, why I'm on these lands today, and why I'm doing what I'm doing today is because of him and my great-grandmother that made choices to be able to send all 10 of their kids to school. In Mexico at the time, like, they had to pay for everything. It was all Catholic school. That was all there was. And so that's that drove my great-grandfather, Papa Manuel, to become a fishing guide and a hunting guide. And so he worked he worked two other jobs at motels and doing a number of other, small jobs here and there, just trying to make it by. I mean, he made 2 pesos a day at the time, which was barely enough to buy a chicken at the end of the day. And so that was, I mean, that just wasn't doing anything for them really. And he was working his butt off for not very much. But guiding was able to get him you get paid up to 40 pesos a day for 1 day of guiding, which was huge. And so that was what flipped their story. It was like his knowledge of the region, from both on land and in the water, really made it for their family. And my grandfather, that's how he was able to go to school, and that's how he eventually was able to come here and make his way through a community college and getting enough credits to graduate at a state college and got a job, and it set everything up for our family, at least through one of my lineage stories. So that it's been in my family for several generations in that aspect. And ironically, whether I knew of him or not, I think I'd still be a fishing guide, which is kind of ironic. But I think, in the good ways, we see history repeat itself. I have a family now here, an awesome partner, and a beautiful son that keeps me busy and keeps me moving forward, and has driven my college as well as my fishing path in recent times. And so I became a fly fishing guide actually fairly recently, this May, as a result of the COVID scenario, as well as I'd actually been weaning my way in prior to that, but it really, the unsafe working working spaces that came with COVID, especially without a college degree, was a big struggle, especially in rural America, for us. And so I didn't have and my son's has a respiratory compromise condition that we learned of just before COVID. And so we were very, very scared, and to have continued to, regardless of his condition, but just to be responsible and make really safe decisions. And so being outside, luckily, was one of those options. And so I dove headfirst, into it, and I've just loved it. It's been an amazing experience that I can definitely see from stories that my grandfather's told me of my great grandfather, because he's always told me since I was a kid, he's like, you have his passion, like I can see it in you, and I feel that I feel that I embody that that passion in different ways, and a love for people too, and a love for food. A big part of my guiding is burritos. I cook burritos for people, different kinds of burritos. And my grandmother, like growing up, when we go fishing, she'd make us whatever was in the fridge. Like the tortilla was your framework. That was your frame, and then anything that was in the fridge just go in it. That's it. That's just how it worked. So that's kind of how I do it with my clients too. I've even made machaca burritos, like venison machaca, so deer that I've harvested. And machaca is an ancestral dish that, in fact, at least from what my grandfather's told me, it goes back millennia, to when our ancestors would dry the meat with salt to keep it, to preserve it, and then they'd rehydrate it. And machacar means to like grind or like smash. And so they'd smash it with rocks to break the meat because it was so hard. And so we don't do that way, at least in my house. We do it with a slow cooker, but in essence you get a similar result. But anyway, long story short, that's how I that's a bit, I mean, but it's important, like that really means like that is my story. It doesn't get any shorter, it can only get longer. So
no, 100%. That is beautiful, and thank you for sharing that.
My partner Karina is also Navajo, and so she has been she has been on her path of reclamation and like finding her history, and she is it's a complicated history for a lot of us. And so she's been working on her fry bread recipe too. And so we need to put some of our recipes together and our family's recipes together. So I was just thinking about that. But
oh my god, we could talk about so much.
Food.
Like like with your partner being Navajo, I am like, what? I would love to connect with her as well. And I like the way that you put, um, she's going through reclamation. That is such a beautiful word for that, because I've been struggling. I've been using the term like reconnecting with my culture, but that doesn't,
Right.
I mean, that's what I'm doing, but I just
Right.
looking for other ways to describe,
Yeah.
you know, that process of assimilation that my parents and their parents went through. And, you know,
Right.
here I am trying to figure it all out, right? And
Yeah.
our
For
elders
sure.
are passing. And so it's like trying to hold on to what's left, and how can I
Yeah.
hold on to those traditions and cultures for sure. So,
I know theoretically like where my family is from, but
yeah.
that is about all we have.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
as far as like, I know that I have indigenous ancestry from Mazatlan, Sinaloa, that
Hmm.
area, but
Hmm.
at least from what I've been able to collect and find through the internet and through talking to my family,
Yeah.
our peoples are no longer around in
Yeah.
that region. That's not to say that the culture isn't still reminiscent in the area, but you know, and then we
Hmm.
also have indigenous ancestry from southern Baja California,
Hmm.
which could potentially be like through the Periku people.
Hmm.
Um, but it's just
Hmm.
so, our histories are just so broken, and
Right.
it's just so difficult. But
Yeah.
I'm also, my last name Kamimura is
Hmm.
Japanese, but that's not our last name. We're
Hmm.
Okinawan. We're indigenous Okinawan.
Hmm.
And so like my family came through Hawaii,
Hmm.
through Maui. We're like living and working on the sugarcane and pineapple plantations,
Hmm.
because yeah, this complicated history there too.
Oh my gosh,
So
I
I also
know.
have, fishing is a huge, you know, part of that side of my family as well.
Right.
Um, it just looks a little different. So
Yeah.
anyway.
Wow, so much to unpack. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And you know, one of the reasons why I invited you to sit with me on the Awkward Angler podcast was
Totally.
I have this, I just started fishing 3 years ago. And
Mm-hmm.
now that I'm getting immersed in all things, not just technique, but now there's ethics, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
just getting to know spawn seasons has been a journey, knowing different types of fish and when they spawn, and, you know, access as far as, you know, private land versus public land. I know that you're really interested in this topic of gatekeeping and inadequate land management. And so I just attended my first local TU chapter meeting, and
Mm-hmm.
I was fascinated because it had mostly fly fishing guides on the call and local anglers. Fly shop folks, you know, were also on the call. And, you know, I didn't realize that these were discussions that I could be involved in, because it seemed so far to, I had no idea about land management. I just never been immersed in that. That's not my education. And, you know, what are other ways that we can um, get around quote unquote gatekeeping? Because I see a lot of guides and a lot of fly anglers really get upset about geotagging and social media, but I feel like there's a little bit more to that of what can we do in our local areas to kind of protect and work with land management to keep the pressure off and to continue keeping these areas preserved, you know, as a community. So what are thoughts around that? And yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and let you speak to that and then we can go from there.
Sure. No, yeah, that's awesome. I'll just because you brought it up, I've been working with TU basically since I started fly fishing.
Mm-hmm.
In different ways. It's, you know, has there's a, depending on where you're at, there's, you know, it's hard for being a person of color, you know, finding
Oh
yourself
yeah.
feeling comfortable attending to those, and which is kind of a nice thing about this virtual world that we're coming into, is that
Mm-hmm.
you don't, it's becoming more accessible, I think, to educate be educated, at least be in the room, and
Mhm.
listening without having to feel super uncomfortable yet,
Yeah.
right?
I was
um,
definitely uncomfortable, but I felt better being on my couch and not having my
right.
camera on. So that was
Yeah.
definitely, I probably wouldn't have attended a meeting otherwise. So I've been putting
Right.
to you off to the side. So anyway, me taking responsibility and doing what I can do, that was a great initial first step. So yeah, anyway, thank you.
Totally. No, that's awesome. Yeah. No, for real. I mean, I was 15, 15 when I started. And it's, it's it could go on forever, but I started as in one of their trout camps in Michigan.
Oh,
um, and that's kind of how I got involved in TU, and TU is a big part of this conversation too.
yeah.
Right. TU has done a lot of really great stuff, but has also done some not great stuff, and
Mhm.
could do better.
Right.
And I say that even as a person. So I am the chair for the youth committee for
Hmm.
the largest chapter in Iowa,
Hmm.
here in Des Moines. And this is a big part of what I do, is talk about these things and educate, right? I mean, and we like, I think this starts with kids, which is why youth education is such a big deal to me. I've been tried to start a youth trout camp here a
Hmm.
couple years ago, but life got in the way, and um, trying to retouch that, but we'll see.
Hmm.
But this my experience with um, access and management, and this idea of overcrowding really took off here in Iowa.
Hmm.
And I want to kind of put this out front and just say that my experience is Iowa.
Hmm.
My what I'm about to talk about is Iowa, right?
Hmm.
Take this for the listeners, right? Take this, you know, as can be applied to what you know and what you're experiencing. I'm not going to try and talk about, Colorado, or, California or Texas or whatever,
Hmm.
right, out east or
Yeah.
something, because that's just not what I know, not yet, at least, right?
Yeah.
I'll be moving soon, so it will be soon. um, but part of what makes it such a problem, and this can be applied to other places, is knowing your water rights, right? So public versus private,
Hmm.
in the state of Iowa, and surrounding states. So in Iowa, we are not allowed to jump off of any bridge that we want. Now, all bridges are public. So if you need to launch or get out, take with a canoe or a kayak or something like that, that's completely legal. You can even fish under a bridge, if you wanted to, but you cannot step into the water and wade upstream or downstream legally, like the wet foot rule. You may have heard of that before. But that is legal in Minnesota, in Wisconsin, and in Michigan, where I grew up. And so
Hmm.
when I got here from Michigan, I was like, I honestly, because I started asking about, like, oh, where can I fish? Started even asking about some private streams, which I didn't know were private. And they were
Hmm.
like, oh, that's a private stream. I was like, what do you mean a private stream? Like,
Yeah.
what is that? Like, that wasn't a thing really, for me in Michigan.
Hmm.
And so started learning about the rules, and I was just coming out of high school, and I didn't really understand uh, that there were different regulations around that.
Hmm.
um, and so I started going to the public areas and fishing, and back maybe, I guess it was 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years, that I started here, and there was nobody. Like, people really just weren't out. Like, I could be on the stream all day by myself and not see a single other person.
Hmm.
Over the past 2 years, that has changed drastically.
Hmm.
Um, this year in particular, and obvious, is COVID, right? The COVID crowds. Um, uh, I mean, I call it outrageous. I don't say this to demean the people that are out, right,
Yeah.
doing these things, right? But I do see it as a failure of our system. The fact that we, and because it's only a few creeks, it's only a few pieces of water that get slammed, right? And everywhere else gets moderate to little pressure, which is nice, and it's nice for those that know about it and know how to fish it and this, that, and the other. But, and because a lot of people, especially guides and especially, I would say even shops, are like, yeah, let them screw up those few creeks and we'll keep ours, right? So that here's the gatekeeping part, right? Like, well, I'd rather them screw up a few creeks than, screw up all of them. But the reality is that distribution of pressure is a huge part of health, right? From like, you don't like, I don't know, like it just doesn't make sense. Like, you don't want to, like, how can you even say ruin a creek? Like, how can you even use that kind of language, right, to describe like, it just doesn't make sense. So I, yeah, so there's that. So that's really important. And so the reason I mentioned the bordering states is because we have a lot of people, and again, I seriously mean nothing against the anglers that are doing this. This is not the problem. You are not the problem. We are not the problem. Right? There's a lot of things that go into this. But when we get folks that, do come over, say, or even me, for example, came over from Michigan, right? Same as someone coming from Wisconsin or coming from Minnesota, right? And don't think that things are different. It's like, well, why? It's like right there, like 15 minutes from my house on the other side of this, right? Why would it be that different? But I mean, it happens, right? So people come, and not realize, or not realize, but that not realize that it has an impact, right, on pressure. So they'll know the regulations. They'll know, okay, I can't get off of a bridge and just walk anywhere. But then people don't know where to go, right? So then people search a name or search online, and they find the first name or these three creeks, and that's where everyone goes. So it's just this disproportionate distribution of pressure. And I think it's difficult. It's a really tough place to be, because Iowa also has a very strong unhealthy catch and keep culture, right? Catch and keep is obviously a very healthy component of management, and culture. But when we have, so our regulations from that standpoint is that you can take 5 fish home per day per license. Doesn't matter the species, doesn't matter the size, doesn't, and I'm talking about trout, I should say trout, right? However, so our native fish is the brook trout. We only have one stream in the state that has the original strain of brook trout, the original quote unquote Iowan strain of brook trout. That's it. And it's less than 2 miles long, and it's tiny, like 5 feet wide, in some places, like super, super small. And they have now taken, fish from that stream and reared it in the hatcheries, and planted in a number of other streams. I believe now we have 10 or 11 streams with naturally reproducing populations of brook trout. In my opinion, still not fishable populations, but nonetheless, they are there. But again, right, that's that versus hundreds of thousands of rainbow trout that get stocked, right, in other streams. You're telling me that you have the same regulations for both of those species, and they're obviously under extremely different circumstantial pressures, right? And so, and brown trout are kind of here and there. They have pretty strong populations in just about all of our streams at this point. And I say strong with a grain of salt, depends on how you see it, depends on what model of management you're wanting to, you know, uh, adhere to. Um, but yeah, it's to me it's a problem. To me, if you, because also the same thing as you look at Minnesota and Wisconsin, and there are like one stream can have 3 or 4 different regulations on that one stream, right? So different sections of the stream, right, are have different issues that they need to address, or different population constraints. I think that's awesome. Like, that is totally what we should be doing. I think, funding is another topic right here that, of research, like on a shoot, I wish, on a bi-monthly basis or something, right, we would be performing, like shut down the day for fishing like one day every 2 months, and so that DNR can go out and fish, do electroshocking and take surveys and reevaluate. And
real quickly, what's DNR?
Oh, yes, thank you. Department of Natural Resources. In other places that may, and that's what it's called in most of the Midwest. In other places out west, it might be Fish and Game. Generalized regulations are dangerous. I think at the end of the day, that's the point that I want to get across. To say trout, there's the saying, trout to trout, the world about. I don't know if you've heard that before. It's a saying I've heard from a number of people in the fly fishing community, typically older folks, that, it's like, they're going to eat the same thing no matter where you go in the world. They're going to, if you got a pheasant tail, hare's ear, and a zebra midge, you're probably good to go. But people tend to, which is true in some regard, but then we don't think about the impact, right, of that kind of mentality as well, right? That, goes into the way we see fish, the way we see different fisheries, right? Each fishery, I mean, I fish streams that are a mile away from each, literally in the next valley over. And it's a totally different place. It functions as a completely different entity, a completely different body. And that's, I suppose, to the degree of intimacy that you have a relationship that you have with that fishery, you may realize that or not, and that's fine. But I'm an aquatic ecologist. That's what I'm studying in school, and that has given me a more critical lens to analyze the environments that I experience, and I get to, I have the privilege of fishing, and so yeah, that if you talk to other fisheries biologists, I'm sure they'll tell you the same thing. Even wildlife biologists, like in general, people that are just out, on a regular basis, like there's a lot. Biology is messy, right? That's what he's like. Biology is messy. Ecology is messy, and that's what it's supposed to be. But when you try and, it's this, right, I guess a colonial concept of categorizations, right, like generalizations, stereotypes, right, come into this, right?
So what are some steps and things that either that you've done that's been successful, or that you're in the works of, or that other people can do? And again, I know that you're speaking in your area, so thanks for noting that, but I'm wondering if there's some education to be had of what, maybe I could do here in this area whenever the place gets overcrowded and mismanaged.
Absolutely. I think taking note of, like, I am pretty close with my fly shop here. And I know that that's a privilege, right? To be able to have a good relationship with a fly shop. Not everyone has that ability,
I just made one, I
unfortunately.
think. I just made a connection with one. I'm really excited. They
Sure.
actually were the ones that invited me to the TU meeting, and I was like, no
Oh,
one's ever
awesome.
invited me to anything like this, and I'm so
That's awesome.
appreciative. And they actually taught me how to tie a perfection loop as well recently. So
Yes.
shout out to Willow
Yes.
Fly Anglers. Thank you. Anyway, okay.
Yes.
So
No,
good
it's
relationship.
huge. It's
Yeah, no, it really makes a
yeah.
difference. Yeah. So I'm
Um,
really thankful to know those guys there. And so yeah, so get to know, get a close relationship with your fly shop. And I know
yeah.
exactly what you mean by that's a privilege, because definitely not
Mhm.
everybody has that for sure. Anyway, go
Right.
on.
I mean, shoot, my even the social inequities in power dynamics of our
Mhm.
community, right?
Right.
To make any kind of huge change by yourself.
Hmm.
And I mean that not right to say that one person can't make a difference, but it's gonna be with other people, right? Making coming together as a collective
Yes.
to make that change. And so I think I would say the best thing people can do is to be critical about their social understanding of their area. So, what I
Hmm.
mean by that is identify those high pressured creeks or waters, identify those, right? And then once you've done that, see what is it that, right, is actually creating that situation, right?
Hmm.
Is it social media? Is it somebody, is it a mag, maybe like and just typically it's marketing that does these things. Is it an overload of outfitters
Hmm.
on those waters? Is it access? Maybe it's that everywhere else is really hard to get access to the
Hmm.
waters, and there's only one river. And I know, I'll talk the Guadalupe River in central Texas,
Hmm.
just south of Austin. Perfect example. Where else are you going to go to trout fish? Right? There
Yeah.
just isn't anywhere else. And so now that's not a wild trout fishery, but if it
Mhm.
was, ugh, it'd be pretty horrific,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Mhm.
But it's all practice. It's all practice of the same stuff, right? Regardless of whether it's a wild fishery or not, right?
Mhm.
There's these ethics still apply.
Mhm.
And so I think diversifying right, everything's conditional, right? Your area, if you only have one trout stream, well, maybe you pick and choose kind of what you want to do with it. Open up your range of access to different species, or I shouldn't say access, but like willingness to chase other species.
Mhm.
um Shoot, I love chasing gar. When I
I don't
like
know
my
what
parents,
gar is.
some gar. So they are, shoot, they're, how do I describe them? They're pretty prehistoric looking. They look like dinosaurs, like in the
Oh,
water. Like,
fun.
they're. Have you heard of alligator gar by
Huh.
chance?
No, I'm like
No.
only
Okay.
trout. Yeah,
Yeah,
so.
yeah, yeah. You're good. So they're like super toothy. Have you heard of maybe muskie or pike? They're esox.
I've heard of pike. Yeah.
Pike. So they're like
Yeah.
really long, slender
Long. Yeah.
fish. So if you can
Mhm.
imagine that with armor, basically plates, like their scales are plated,
Oh,
basically.
wow.
Um, and yeah, they have long, snouts, just like pike, but even longer, like super
Mhm.
long, like a needle.
Wow.
And they have teeth, lots of teeth. So they're cool, but people don't chase them that much,
Mhm.
unless. But I get Texas, like so my parents lived in Fort Worth for a while before St. Louis, and so I
Mhm.
go down there and bass is the big thing, but I'd go
Mhm.
and catch 20 25-inch 30-inch gar on tenkara with a hopper. Like, like just put some wire, like, put some 30-40 pound wire, and on even style of a perfection loop or a non-slip mono loop or something, on with a hopper, and you see them cruising because they'll porpoise, and so they'll come up and actually breathe air.
Uh-huh.
And so you'll see them come up and they'll look like they're rising, to like eat something, but they're
Yeah.
actually they're a type of lungfish.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so anyway, yeah, they're pretty cool. There's we have so many stigmatizations of
Oh,
fish, in like fly fishing in particular, but fishing in general.
that's a really good point of targeting different species, like diversify
Hmm.
your catches. you know.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
And
What
it's
else?
tough. That's not an easy thing. um, yeah. So for you as an individual, choosing your, even changing your own behavior, right? So leading by example kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, so something that I do as a guide is
Mm-hmm.
I'm very cognizant about not fishing the same piece of water. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, so I'm a student, right? Student first and foremost. And so I have, I really guide on the weekends. And so on a
Mm-hmm.
week to week basis, we're not fishing the same water.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, and if it doesn't mean I won't fish the same creek, but I'm not going to fish the same stretch that I fished last week.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, that not only does that distribute pressure, it also um, creates a deeper relationship with a fishery. Like, you're going to learn a fishery, and again, breaking barriers of generalization and stereotypes, right? That
Mm-hmm.
all the water is the same and that all the fish respond the same. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I have a creek, one of my favorite creeks here. I'm not going to name it, but again, so this is another, so we'll get to that, the naming stuff. I want to touch on that as well.
Yeah.
um, but it's basically three different types of fisheries. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
literally a trifold fishery.
Mm-hmm.
It's a standard spring creek at the top, where you have a bunch of watercress, which is like it's a aquatic vegetation, holds a lot of scuds. Scuds, aquatic shrimp
Mm-hmm.
type bug. Um, and really, just really great blue-winged olive hatches and midge hatches in the winter, and
Mm-hmm.
really strong springs. So, it's a great winter fishery and awesome. It gets a little funky in the summertime because of all the foliage and vegetation. But that's kind of that, and it's in a pasture area.
Mm-hmm.
Towards the middle of it, you get a little bit more wooded, woodland, riparian environment, bank environment. And so it's a lot rockier bottom, some bigger boulders even, and
Yeah.
it turns into a little bit more of a freestone. Actually, a little bit faster water, some more plunge pool type situations.
Yeah.
And and it hits the bluffs, so it'll,
Mm-hmm.
like, we have like bluff country in the driftless. So it'll the creeks will literally run right under the bluff and then come back out, and usually they're really deep there. So you get, and then down at the bottom, it's like a sand river almost.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's sand bottom,
Yeah.
mucky towards on the banks. You have to be really careful about where you wade. You have to know how and again, this is part of the intimacy, right? A relationship that you grow with a stream or a piece of water is, like, you have to know how to wade these areas. You have to know how they're going to change. You have to know how they're, in order to do it safely.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like, that's a big part of what I do and why I do it. And
Right.
so, like, so yeah, so choosing these different areas with intention,
Mm-hmm.
um, and learning how to fish all of them, right?
Yeah.
So investing time into these different scenarios, and, like, up top, I might be fishing a lot more scuds. In the middle, I might be, in the midsection, I might be fishing some more, mayflies and stoneflies because of the boulders and, the faster water, higher oxygenated water.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe down lower, I might be fishing more leeches and really big stone flies, maybe even helger mites. I don't know if you know, like, they're Dobson fly larvae. They're really big,
Mm-hmm.
really big. They're a really well-known smallmouth snack. Smallmouth love eating helger mites.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, yeah. So, like, again, learning these different, you can't just, you're not just going to show up and there it is, everything is perfect. But
love hearing that, because I learned from a person that kind of overgeneralized everything, kind of back to that, like just one thing. And this is, he only fish hoppers and streamers. And so me trying to develop my own skills and whatnot, that is so refreshing to hear, because I mostly fish the Gunnison or the Taylor River. And I am noticing already the differences between the Taylor fish versus the Gunnison fish, and then also using different flies. And I would get frustrated because I'm like, well, this works on the Taylor and it's literally like just 20 miles down and it's not working, and so that makes complete sense, and that's just refreshing to hear. So thank you.
And no problem. Yeah. And even while we're on that, like even changing your rigging, like each river, literally the hydraulics are different. The water behaves differently, which is going to change how fish see food, how they search for their food, and how they capture their food, right? So like, out in Michigan, there's sand, a lot of, like they're super fast, high discharge, like a lot of water moving through. And so these like fish are either glued to the bottom, under wood, trying to get out, kind of using like log jams, kind of like an undercut bank, or they're sitting right on this sand point bar, like literally on in the inside bend of of the river, or of a bend, trying to get relief from the current. And that's also a really great place for them to ambush like small bait fish, or especially in the springtime when we have the baby trout or baby steelhead or baby salmon that are rising from the gravel, and they'll school in those in those little eddies and inside bends and stuff like that. And so a big an effective predator is going to know where those are, and an effective angler is going to know where those are and where the fish are, right? So one leads to the next, right? So understanding hydraulics is a really big part of it too. So like even here, like we have small creeks, but the same thing happens in big rivers, right? You have a rise in discharge, right, from a rain or something like that. It's going to push fish to the banks. They're going to seek relief. And
I just learned some new rigging techniques. I didn't know that was a thing. So literally, that's why I went to the fly shop, and he taught me the perfection loop and just so much, and then also to that, I think you've taught me so much, not only in this call, but just getting to know you on Instagram, and distributing the pressure that I'm doing as an individual. I definitely hit this one spot pretty hard for like an entire week. And now I was like, oh, actually that I can change my behavior, right? And I can distribute that pressure, because that is a highly visited spot. So you've made me more aware already of like, okay, I need to be more creative in where I'm going, and not hit that same spot that everybody's going to be at, right? So thank you.
And it's also no problem. That's awesome. I'm really glad that these questions are coming up, and it's also like for those that listening, and yourself included, like don't beat yourself up over that creek was really good last week. It's like I don't want to go anywhere else, but it's and this is right, it's again all within context. When we're fishing if we were our ancestors, which I would love to get back to, which is part of this management perspective, right? Fishing for sustenance, which I do on occasion. So if I go where I know I'm gonna get a fish because I'm taking it home for my family, right? So it's all within context. We are. I don't like the term, but it is what we do, unfortunately, at this point in time, is sporting, right? We do sport. And so taking, being respectful in as much as we can be in that relationship is critical.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
and I think what
yeah.
comes with that is an education, right? Like kind of going back to me, yours, and your partner's understanding of our own culture, right? And kind of working through that and relearning, right? Reclaiming. And
Right. Yeah.
that plays a part in it of like, okay, how can we move forward with not only the sport, but also connecting with our culture as well? So I definitely fish for sustenance as well when I can. And if I have the proper tools and whatnot to haul it back home. but
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I think also just that education of moving
Yep.
forward together. Yeah.
Yep. And in that same regard, like, and I'll speak for myself, when I choose to take fish home, I'm not going to take a fish home from those quote unquote restored brook trout populations.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to take fish home from a stream that I know has gotten slammed all season long. I'm not going to teach, but again, but it's right, connects to your point on education, right? Is understand this is not readily available to the public, which is
No.
why this is such a big problem. And I think we need to um, empower, uplift, and amplify anecdotal like data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, oral data. This is where like guides need to be speaking with the public about what's happening. And I would say, especially guides on big water.
Mm-hmm.
And now, again, I say that with a grain of salt because I'm not a guide on big water. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure there's some social and political baggage that comes with that. But
Mm-hmm.
is it so bad, but is it your ego or is it your is it really going to jeopardize your career? Is it real, right, this that and right, it's like people get like there's I would say a majority, from what I know, majority of our industry is driven by clientele through fly shops. And so and those spots are, they're hard. And especially this year, they've been real hard to fill. But on a typical year, like those big shops, they're gonna have the people come in whether there's fish or not. To be honest.
Yeah.
So being uh, yeah, being advocates, being agents of like of care, like
Yeah.
tenders, caretakers. Um,
Right.
yeah, like
Speaking of, you kind of made me think of, those big water, and shops, and you're gonna get
mhm,
people coming no matter what. And I think that's very like under white supremacy culture, which is this
mhm,
individualistic mentality, get mine, this competitive
yep,
edge. And it's very, which contributes to capitalism, right? And so,
correct,
um, and when you say be agents, I think of the alternative, which is seventh generation thinking,
yep,
and kind of
yep,
thinking of
absolutely.
like, do you ever see that kind of concept within management?
Nope. Yep, exactly. No, we're on the same page here. That's for certain.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest reasons I also got into guiding is I wanted to help bring perspective and healthy like habits and knowledge to other Iowan fly fishers. I
Mm-hmm.
only have two clients I had this year that were from not from Iowa, and that was it.
Wow.
All of the rest of my clients were from Iowa, and that was on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
um, for the most part. I didn't not um, I didn't say no to non-Iowans, but that was my mark. The people I actually targeted as my audience for clientele was here, and
Yeah.
so that was kind of how I did that. And it's again for those same reasons, keeping it local. Hey, this is what you have. This is your home. You know, this is what you have here, and this is what we need to try and help protect and grow. Like, this is possible, you know, like
Right.
we just had a, you know, a 30-40 fish day on a wild brown trout stream, you know, with a couple fish 17 inches. Like, you know, that's pretty freaking cool, you know, for a small stream experience. Like it is possible, you know.
Kind of going back to that individualistic mindset, whereas
Mm-hmm.
I wish we could shift to kind of what you're thinking of. This is our home. Here, you know, you're putting yourself in an educator role and taking that opportunity to educate locals and say, you know, this is important to not only me, but you and, you know, like our whole entire ecosystem of where we're visiting today, right? And I really, really wish that more guides had that understanding, because that is also adopting that seventh generation mentality. It's that, you know, it's more holistic. It's not so individual. It's not so me, mine. So having these elements of looking in at a diverse perspective and bringing in this educational component that is so important for the longevity and health of these areas. So thank you for sharing that. A mind shift, you know, instead of saying me, mine, and I'm going to do this because I make money off of it today, right, or this week. It's expanding that narrative and thinking of many impacts rather than just yourself. And so that is like my personal call to action for guides and folks in the industry. And it's so off-putting when we see this blaming social media and blaming, you know, of just other people for overcrowding. And it's the wrong narrative. I feel like it's pushing people out to even try, when I've seen fly fishing be a gateway to conservation. So once you become a fly angler, you start to build a relationship with these places.
The word that, you know, is used for, like, that I think of this too is like reciprocity, right? Is this relational relationship where we give, and it's a cyclical relationship. And to me, if we, that's the, like, local, the underpinnings of local is reciprocity, is reciprocal. Right? It's the off-putting responsibility that's dangerous, right? It's the DNR's job, it's the management's job to do the work, not mine.
If we all just took responsibility, imagine a world, right?
Right. And so, and the thing is, like, well, you know, if we just put in some trees here and some prairie grass here and stabilize the bank and add some structure and this, that, well, and no, that's only half of it. And in fact, somebody had to take responsibility, right? In order for that to happen. So we need to change our behaviors to embody that, to embody management, to embody conservation. Like I talk about, like, you know, people call themselves conservationists, but don't live it. Like, don't, you know, and I'm not, you know, there's all kinds of nuance topics that we could talk about within fly fishing, which I would love to have on another call if you want. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into that, but it starts with your mindset and how you go into it. Like, and I've been, you know, a lot of people, I don't know, I would love to see the word love, ironically, right? Love to see. I come into this picture, like, what does it mean to love the fish, to love the water, to love what you do so much that you are that you want to think about it that deeply, because
Right.
people, there's also this narrative that comes with fly fishing, which is appropriate under context, right? That is, I want to come out here in this serenity and, be detach myself, right, from
Mhm.
the outside world, and which
Right.
is awesome. But
Escape.
that detachment doesn't come with healing
Mm.
until you allow the relationship to heal you. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if not, you're just bringing your problems,
Yeah.
i.e. colonization, uh,
Yep.
to a new land.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
um,
So often I'm noticing people don't ask questions in fly fishing. We just do
mm,
what we're told. Like, oh yeah, just
mm-hmm.
whatever you do, just use 6X only. I was
Yep,
told
yep.
that. And you don't stop to ask why. And so now that
Yeah,
I'm learning new rod setups. I'm learning,
yeah.
when to fish, when not to fish, and what I can do as an individual to, you know, relieve pressure and spread that out to be a more conscious angler. So thank you for sharing
Mhm.
that. And yeah, you have taught me so much, not only on your Instagram account, but this call. But so I put out a little thing on Instagram where, um, of just like what other people are doing as far as if you're a guide, how do you work with your local forest service, or,
Right.
what does that look like? And somebody had put, our shops keep track of where we all go. Certain permits only
Mm,
allow so much guided anglers. And so,
sure.
and then also the lodge I worked at only allowed 12 guides at a time for 30 miles of river through Forest Service.
Mm,
Another has been a lottery system to gain access to water. And, this is a really good point of exclusivity and privilege remain the go-to solution. And so that's an interesting perspective because, again, that's that grayness. That's that,
mm-hmm.
so what do you think about limiting and, yeah, there's just so much here to
Yeah,
unpack.
yeah, yep.
What is the reasonable solution, and unfortunately that is like the technical solution is limiting and
Mhm.
being exclusive,
Yeah.
because not everyone has adopted that adaptive mindset of, hey, let's think holistically here. We're not there yet. So
Mhm.
I guess I kind of
Right,
understand, kind of the default gatekeeping
right.
in a sense. So anyway.
And that's, yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we're like, that's what I was talking about, even with the sustenance and catch and release stuff, is like,
Yeah.
well, at the end of the day, catch and release is still a tool to
Yeah.
get back to what we want, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
sustenance. I'm gonna offer some links, that
Mhm.
maybe we can put
Yeah.
in an Instagram post or something like that.
Yeah. There's a
Um,
resources thing on the
that
end of our outline, and those will all go on the website.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So within that, there's one link that
Mhm.
talks about the excise tax that comes with. So I'm a fly tire, and so I produce a product, right, which falls under an excise tax bracket, right? So I pay 10%, that you know goes towards wildlife and sport fishing
Mhm.
restorative work,
Mhm.
funding. So does rods. All the rods we buy, all the reels, all fly shops and fishing shops and all these things, right? Even manufacturers, right, have to pay this tax,
Mhm.
which goes into funding for management. Well, there's this. The way this works, though, and there's a model and there's an image that I can also share. They call it the cycle of success.
Mhm.
And it starts with benefits to, like, or with, it's a cycle, right? So it doesn't really start anywhere, but you can't get funding without doing everything else first. So it I theoretically starts with public benefits, which are opportunities, choices, and recreation. ironic how that, right, like sustenance is not in that model. Industry benefits, which is right, which also brings in race, right, and even nationalism into this.
Yeah.
I grew up. You catch it, you eat it. That's how I grew
Yeah.
up. So anyway, so and then there's the industry benefits, which is sales, growth, and conservation. Interesting how we were, there we go. Yeah, how we were talking about capitalism being part of this problem. Well, there you see it, right? And right, who? So are we here to? It's just and it's complicated, right? But then it
Yeah.
goes to hunters, shooters, anglers, right? Basically, equipment, purchase of equipment, and then the tax that comes from that. And at the end of the day, that goes into the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which ends up in funding projects. Well, there's also this inequity of, right, we talk about inequities of equipment, right, of financial, right, access to equipment. Well, this system literally drives prices, right, but it's on the business end, it's not on the management end. It's businesses saying, I want to make X, Y, and Z amount of dollars, and so I'm going to put it on the consumer. So part of the way I do business, and this is just me, right, so I'm not gonna, but I just want, I want this conversation, right, to allow people to ask questions, right, about their own experiences and about other experiences. It's just what this is about. I'm not criticizing, any particular business, right?
Yeah.
Because we're all in this together at the end of the day. Part of what I do and my goal, right? I mean, I am going to college to try and get a job, right, at the end of the day doing something else. And my fly tying is a supplemental thing for now, right? And I kind of, the way I round this out is, I don't need to make a bazillion dollars off of this stuff. I maximize my materials, and this is the other right. So we can go on to go into fly tying, and shoot that way. But I'll just say that, I am very intentional about my material use, and I actually I am able to keep my costs very, very low, for what goes into it and the amount of time it takes me to tie one. But that's taken, I mean, I've practiced that, right? And that's I'll just say it. We don't have to talk about it, but I'll say that I think skill is something that colonization has removed from our systems as well. That is part of sustainability, and is also part of this management conversation. But not everyone has the time for it, right? Not everyone has the resources for it. Not everyone, right? So it's again complicated. But is the goal here, right?
Yeah.
Is the goal for businesses to make money, or is the goal for the fish to benefit? Who's benefiting? Because unless you have sustenance, which is not in this model, you cannot have people, and fish cannot benefit.
Well, thank you so much again for your time and your knowledge. And I have a lot to chew on, and I learned a ton. I took so many notes, so I am really excited to just learn more and stay connected with you. And just thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and being with us today.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Head over to awkwardangler.com for show notes and resources. You can send appreciations by subscribing, sharing with a friend, rating the podcast, or Venmo at Awkward Angler. Special thanks to my Brown Folks Fishing family for your support. I'm Erica Nelson, inviting you to be an Awkward Angler. See you next week.